It's been 50 years since the murders. But last night, in a cabin thousands of miles away, I heard the voices of the DeFeo family calling my name. My name is Michael Torres, and I'm a delivery driver from Phoenix. At 34, I've seen enough of life's harsh realities through windshields and doorsteps to know that most ghost stories are just people looking for attention or trying to make sense of their own misery. That's what I told myself when I clicked enter on that contest back in October. A haunted getaway weekend sponsored by some streaming platform called Darkstream Plus. Free lodging, free food, all expenses paid to some remote mountain lodge in Colorado. The catch? It was supposedly haunted. The skeptic in me laughed. The broke delivery driver in me hit submit. 3 weeks later, I got the call. I'd won, along with 4 other people from across the country. We'd be meeting at Whisperwind Lodge, nestled somewhere in the Colorado Rockies, accessible only by a winding dirt road that would make my delivery van wheeze in protest. The woman on the phone had an odd tone when she gave me the address like she was reading from a script, but didn't quite believe the words herself. The drive up took 6 hours from Denver, the last 2 on roads that seemed to exist more as suggestions than actual pathways. By the time I pulled into the circular gravel drive, the sun was already setting behind the peaks, casting everything in that peculiar purple light that makes the mountains look like sleeping giants. Whisperwind Lodge was impressive, a massive log structure that looked like it had been built for lumber barons or railroad tycoons. 3 stories of dark wood and stone, with wide porches that wrapped around the entire building. Windows glowed warmly from within, and smoke curled from multiple chimneys. If this place was supposed to be haunted, at least it was haunted in style. The other 4 were already there, standing in the main room like strangers at a high school reunion. I recognized the awkward energy immediately, people thrown together by circumstance, trying to figure out who they were dealing with. Sandra Lee introduced herself first. 27, a teacher from Springfield, Illinois, with a kind of earnest smile that made you want to trust her immediately. She had dark circles under her eyes that she tried to hide with makeup, and when she shook my hand, hers was cold despite the warmth of the lodge. Tyrell Brooks was next, a trucker from Dallas, with hands like catcher's mitts and a voice that had been seasoned by truck stops and cigarettes. At 41, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd driven every highway in America and lived to tell about it. But there was something in his eyes, a wariness that went deeper than road fatigue. Emily Chun was quiet, observing. U.S. all with the practiced assessment of someone used to reading people quickly. 29, a nurse from Portland with the kind of steady presence that probably saved lives on night shifts. She kept touching her throat absently, like she was checking for something that shouldn't be there. The last member of our group made. My cop instincts tingle if I'd had cop instincts. Robert Bobby Lane was 53, built like a fire hydrant, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He said he was retired, from Newark originally, but everything about him screamed law enforcement. The way he positioned himself with his back to the wall, how his gaze swept the room's exits, the slight bulge under his jacket that suggested he was carrying Dot, so Sandra said, her teacher voice cutting through the awkward silence. Anyone know why they picked us? We compared stories. All of us had entered the same contest, all of us from different states, all of us supposedly chosen at random. The prize was simple, a weekend at a haunted lodge, with all our activities being filmed for a potential streaming series. Cameras were mounted discreetly throughout the common areas, but our bedrooms were off limits. We'd signed waivers of course, but nothing too unusual. What was unusual was the lodge itself. The place felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The wood was beautiful, rich, dark timber that gleamed in the firelight, but it had an odd smell, like something sweet, trying to cover something rotten. The temperature seemed to fluctuate for no reason. One moment you'd be comfortable. The next you'd feel a chill that made your breath visible. And the flies, even though it was November in Colorado, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds above, there were flies. Not many, just enough to be noticeable. They gathered around the windows mostly, sluggish and wrong-looking, like they were struggling to stay alive in the cold. Emily noticed them first. "This is weird," she said, swatting at one that had landed on her wrist. "Flies shouldn't be active at this temperature. Maybe they're coming from somewhere warm in the building," Tyrell suggested, but his voice carried doubt. Bobby was examining the wood grain on the walls with the intensity of a detective. "This timber's old," he said. "Older than the lodge. Look at the wear patterns. This wood's been used before, in a different building." The first night passed quietly enough. We ate dinner together, steaks and potatoes prepared by an invisible kitchen staff who left everything warming in the dining room before disappearing. The wine was good. The conversation gradually loosened up, and by 10 o'clock we were sharing the kind of stories strangers tell each other when they're trying to figure out if they're safe. Sandra talked about her recurring nightmares, dreams where she was drowning in dark water that tasted like copper. She'd been having them for years, she said, always the same sinking down through black water while voices called her name from above. Tyrell mentioned the boy he'd seen outside his truck 3 nights ago while parked at a rest stop in Oklahoma. A child with black eyes who'd stood just at the edge of his headlight beam, not moving, not blinking, until Tyrell had gotten out to investigate and found nothing. Emily was reluctant to share, but eventually admitted she'd been waking up with her mouth full of dead flies for the past week. "I thought maybe I was sleepwalking, leaving windows open," she said. "But I live in a high-rise apartment. The windows don't open." Bobby listened to all of this with the expression of someone collecting evidence. When pressed, he finally admitted he'd driven past the Amityville house once, back when he was a rookie cop in '89. "Just curiosity," he said. "But I never forgot the feeling. Like the house was watching me back." We went to our separate rooms around midnight. The lodge had been designed so that each guest room was isolated from the others, connected by long hallways lined with those same reclaimed timbers. My room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the forest, and it was comfortable enough: king bed, fireplace, private bathroom. The kind of place you'd pay good money for under normal circumstances. I was almost asleep when I heard the knocking. 3 deliberate knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. Pause. Then 3 more. I checked my phone. 3:15 a.m. exactly. The knocking was coming from inside the walls. I sat up in bed, listening, and heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate steps that paused at my door before continuing on. Then Sandra's voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" I opened my door to find her standing in the hallway in her pajamas, looking pale and frightened. Tyrell emerged from his room at the same time, followed by Emily and Bobby. "The knocking," Sandra whispered. "Did everyone hear it?" We all had. 3 knocks, repeating, always pausing at exactly the same intervals. Bobby was already moving, his retired cop instincts taking over. "Stay together," he said. "Let's check the common areas." We made our way downstairs as a group, but the knocking had stopped. The lodge was silent, except for the settling creaks that old buildings make and the whisper of wind through the eaves. The fires in the main room were still burning, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. Probably just the building settling, I said, but my voice sounded unconvincing even to me. "Buildings don't settle in patterns." Bobby replied, examining the windows for signs of disturbance. That was deliberate. Someone or something was sending a message. We stayed up until dawn, taking turns keeping watch, but nothing else happened. When morning came, we tried to rationalize it. Old building, mountain acoustics, maybe animals in the walls. But the smell lingered, that sweet rotten odor that seemed stronger now, mixed with something that reminded me of fireworks. Gunpowder. Day 2 started normally enough. The invisible staff had left a full breakfast spread, and we ate while discussing. The previous night, in daylight, with coffee and bacon, it was easier to explain away. We were all stressed, in an unfamiliar place, expecting to be scared. Our minds had made connections that weren't there. But then, Emily found the flies in her coffee. Not just 1 or 2 dozens of them, floating in the black liquid like tiny bloated raisins. She screamed and dropped the mug, sending coffee and dead insects across the hardwood floor. They weren't there a second ago, she gasped. I just poured it. I was stirring in sugar, and then Sandra was backing away from the mess, her face white. The smell, she said. It smells like my dreams. Was right. The spilled coffee and dead flies gave off that copper water smell, the same smell that accompanied Sandra's drowning nightmares. Tyrell was examining the other coffee cups. Just Emily's, he reported. The rest are clean. Why me? Emily asked, and that's when Bobby spoke up, his voice grim. Because you're the one who's been finding them in your mouth, he said. Whatever's happening here, it knows things about us. Personal things. That afternoon, while trying to distract ourselves, with card games and forced conversation, we heard the voices. They started as whispers, so faint we thought it might be wind in the walls. But gradually they became clearer, more insistent. A woman's voice, crying. A man's voice, angry and slurred. Children's voices, pleading. And then impossibly, we heard our own names being called. Sandra. Sandra, help us. Tyrell, you have to listen. Emily, we know what you did. Bobby, you remember us. Michael, you can't run from this. Sandra was the first to break. She stood up from the card table, tears streaming down her face. That's my mother's voice, she whispered. But my mother's been dead for 3 years. The voices knew things they shouldn't have known. Sandra's secret shame about not being there when her mother died. Tyrell's hit-and-run accident from 15 years ago that no one ever connected to him. Emily's guilt about the patient she'd lost last year, the one whose death could have been prevented if she'd checked the monitors 5 minutes earlier. Bobby's cover-up of evidence in a domestic violence case that had gone wrong, and my own secret. The package I'd lost last Christmas because I knew it contained medication for a kid with leukemia, and I couldn't bear to deliver death's bill on. Christmas Eve. The voices knew everything. As evening fell, the phenomena escalated. The water in the sinks ran red, thick and metallic. The flies multiplied, swarming despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. The temperature in the lodge plummeted, our breath forming clouds, even with all the fires blazing. Bobby was the one who figured it out. He'd been studying those reclaimed timbers all day, running his hands over the wood grain, measuring dimensions. During dinner, he suddenly stood up, his face pale. I know what this is, he said. I know where this wood came from. He led us to the main staircase, pointing out details in the timber construction. See these marks? These aren't from normal wear. These are impact marks. Bullet holes filled and sanded over. The realization hit me like ice water. Amityville. Bobby nodded grimly. The house was renovated in the 80s, after all the publicity died down. They replaced a lot of the interior wood, trying to erase the history. But wood, like this, doesn't get thrown away. It gets sold to salvage companies. You're saying this lodge was built with wood from the DeFeo house? Sandra's voice was barely a whisper. Not just built with it, Bobby said. I think this entire place was designed around it. Look at the layout, the room spacing, the stair configuration. It's a replica. Someone recreated the Amityville house in The Colorado mountains, using the original materials. That's when Emily made the connection. The contest, she said. The streaming platform, when did you all enter? We compared dates. All of us had entered in the same week in October. The same week as the 50th anniversary of the DeFeo murders. We weren't chosen randomly. I said, the pieces falling into place. We were selected. But why us? What do we have in common? Bobby had the answer to that too, and it made my blood run cold. We're all carrying guilt, he said. All of us have secrets, things we're ashamed of, and guilt. Guilt is what feeds these things. The DeFeo spirits, they're drawn to it. They can smell it on us. That night, we tried to leave. The road was blocked by a fallen tree that hadn't been there when we arrived. Our cars wouldn't start, the engines would turn over, but something was wrong with the ignition systems. Our cell phones showed no signal, even though we'd had bars just 2 days earlier. We were trapped with the ghosts of America's most famous haunted house, thousands of miles from their origin, but no less deadly. The third night was when Michael Torres, the skeptic from Phoenix, finally accepted that some things can't be explained by logic or reason. At 3:15 a.m., the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from our doors. Individual knocking patterns for each of us, like someone was sending personal messages in code. I opened my door to find a young man standing in the hallway. He was about my age, wearing clothes from the 1970s, and his face was pale as moonlight. Blood trickled from a hole in his forehead. Hello, Michael, he said in Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s voice, a voice I recognized from the trial tapes Bobby had played for us earlier that day. I've been waiting for you. Down the hall, I could see the others, facing their own encounters. Sandra was talking to a woman with waterlogged features who kept reaching for her with desperate hands. Tyrell was backing away from a child with black eyes who looked exactly like the boy he'd seen at the rest stop. Emily was surrounded by flies that formed shapes in the air, human shapes that whispered accusations about every patient she'd ever lost. Bobby was facing the entire DeFeo family, all 6 victims standing in a line, their wounds visible and weeping. You remember us, Don DeFeo said to him, her 13-year-old voice carrying an adult's pain. You came to our house, you stood in our rooms. You felt what we felt. The spirits weren't just haunting the lodge, they were completing some kind of circle, using our guilt as a conduit to anchor themselves in a new location. The wood had brought them here, but we were giving them the emotional energy they needed to fully manifest. As the night progressed, the encounters became more intense. The spirits showed us visions of our failures, magnified and distorted until our guilt became unbearable. Sandra relived her mother's death over and over, each time arriving just a moment too late. Tyrell felt the impact of his truck hitting that pedestrian, heard the crack of bones, saw the blood on his bumper. Emily watched her patients die in endless loops while she stood frozen, unable to help, and I delivered that lost package again and again, each time seeing the hope die in the parents' eyes as they realized their child's medication wouldn't arrive in time. But Bobby showed us how to fight back. Guilt is what they're feeding on, he shouted over the growing supernatural storm. But guilt can be transformed. It can become something else: determination, justice, protection. He faced the DeFeo family spirits directly, not running from his shame, but accepting it, transforming it. I failed you once, he said. I saw your pain, and I walked away. But I won't walk away now. One by one, we followed his example. Instead of running from our guilt, we faced it, acknowledged it, and chose to transform it into something more powerful. The spirits began to fade, not because they were being banished, but because they were being understood. The DeFeo family had died violently, suddenly, without resolution. They'd been trapped by their own trauma, feeding on the guilt and pain of others, because it was familiar, because it matched their own experience of betrayal and loss. But when we showed them that guilt could be transformed into compassion, that shame could become empathy, they began to find peace. As dawn broke on our final day, the lodge was quiet. The flies were gone, the temperature had returned to normal, and the smell of gunpowder and decay had been replaced by the clean scent of mountain air. We found a note from the streaming platform, apologizing for technical difficulties with the cameras and offering us compensation for our inconvenience. The contest, they said, had been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances, but we knew better. We'd been chosen for a purpose, brought together to help lay to rest the spirits of one of America's most famous tragedies. The wood from the Amityville house would remain in Whisperwind Lodge, but it would no longer carry the pain of the DeFeo family. We exchanged contact information before leaving, bound together by an experience none of us would ever fully understand, but all of us would remember. We'd faced our guilt, our shame, our deepest failures, and we'd found redemption not in forgetting them, but in transforming them. As I drove back down that winding mountain road, watching the lodge disappear in my rearview mirror, I made a promise to myself and to the memory of the DeFeo family. I would be better. I would make choices based on compassion rather than fear, on connection rather than isolation, because sometimes the dead don't want revenge. They just want to be remembered, understood, and forgiven. And sometimes the living need the same thing. They said the Amityville tapes were lost, but someone sent me one, and when I played it, my neighbors started dying. My name is David Grant, and I've been spinning records and ghost stories on WKFL's late-night horror segment for 12 years. Nothing much happens in Clearwater, Florida. After midnight, just me, my coffee-stained microphone, and whoever's lonely or insomniac enough to tune into Midnight Terrors. I thought I'd heard every creepy tale, seen every piece of supposed paranormal evidence. I was wrong. The package arrived on a Tuesday in March 2025. No return address, just my name scrawled in faded ink across brown paper that felt older than it should have. Inside, wrapped in what looked like a child's yellow blanket, was a reel-to-reel tape. The label, written in the same shaky handwriting, read, Amityville, 1975. Do not play. I should have thrown it away. Any sane person would have. But I'd built my career on the macabre, the unexplained, the things that go bump in the night. My listeners expected authenticity, and this felt real in a way that sent ice through my veins, even in Florida's sticky heat. The tape sat on my desk for 3 days, that yellow blanket beside it like a memorial shroud. Every time I looked at it, the air conditioning seemed to fail, leaving the studio thick with humidity that made even the afternoon sunlight feel oppressive. My reflection in the booth's window moved just slightly off sync with my actual movements. Trick of tired eyes, I told myself. Thursday night, during my 2 a.m. segment, I queued up the tape. Folks, someone sent me something special tonight, I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Claims it's from the Amityville house, 1975. Now, we all know those tapes were supposedly destroyed, but I hit play. Static filled the studio. Then underneath it, something else. Faint screams, like they were coming from very far away. A woman's voice, barely audible, pleading, please, help us. They won't stop. And a gunshot, sharp and final. The silence that followed felt heavier than the Florida air. I played maybe 30 seconds before cutting it off, my hands shaking as I reached for the stop button. Well, that's something I managed, trying to keep my voice light. Could be anything, of course. Sound effects, amateur dramatics. But it certainly sets the mood, doesn't it? The phone didn't ring for the rest of the show. Not once. In 12 years, that had never happened. I went home as dawn broke, exhausted and unsettled. The humidity clung to me like guilt, and I swore I could smell something rotting in my apartment, though I'd taken out the trash the night before. I fell into bed and dreamed of yellow blankets and faceless children standing in doorways. I woke to my phone ringing at 3 p.m. The caller ID showed nothing. David Grant. The voice was young, female, scared. Yes. My name is Kara Mitchell. I'm calling from Ohio State University. I listened to your show last night. Her voice cracked. 5 people are dead. The words hit me like cold water. What are you talking about? I've been tracking the listeners, she said, speaking fast now, desperate to get it all out. Social media posts, call logs from your station. At least 12 people heard that tape segment. 5 of them died between 4 and 6 a.m. Accidents, they're calling them. But David... Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was there when one of them happened. Kara told me about her roommate, Sarah, who'd listened to the show while studying. At 4:17 a.m., Sarah had gotten up to take a bath. Kara found her an hour later, drowned in water that had turned black as oil. The tub was overflowing, but the water coming from the faucets ran clear. There's something else, Kara continued. I've been in contact with others who heard it. There's a mechanic in Nevada named Luis Romero. He keeps seeing a faceless child in his garage. A retired nurse in Maine, Patricia Holloway, she's getting phone calls from numbers that don't exist. And Derek Stiles, a security guard in Michigan. He says his CCTV feeds are showing shadows that shouldn't be there. My blood turned to ice. How did you find all this? I'm a computer science major. I spent all day tracking down everyone I could. Find who mentioned your show online. David, we're the survivors, but I don't think we're safe. That night, I didn't go to work. I sat in my apartment, staring at the reel-to-reel player I brought home. The tape was still on it, and I could swear. It was moving, just slightly, even though the machine was unplugged. The yellow blanket lay crumpled on my coffee table, and every few minutes I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Like a child's hand reaching out from underneath, my phone rang at midnight. The number was my own. David. My voice came through the speaker, but I wasn't speaking. You played our song. I hung up and immediately called Kara. It's happening to all of us, she said before I could speak. She sounded like she hadn't slept. Luis called an hour ago. The faceless child touched his shoulder, left a handprint that won't wash off. Patricia says the whispering phone calls are getting longer, and she can almost make out words now. Derek... Derek's seeing things in mirrors that aren't reflections. We have to destroy the tape. I said, I tried that, Kara replied, her voice hollow. I broke into your station. Thought maybe if I destroyed the original. But David, when I got there were dozens of copies. Reel-to-reel, cassettes, CDs, even digital files on computers that weren't connected to anything. Every format you can imagine. I looked at my coffee table. Where there had been one tape, now there were 3. We need to meet, I said. All of us. We need to figure this out together. Kara had somehow coordinated everything. 2 days later, I found myself in a run-down motel in Memphis, Tennessee, the geographic center of our spread-out group. The others arrived throughout the afternoon. Luis, a stocky man whose left shoulder bore a perfect child's handprint in what looked like soot. Patricia, elderly but sharp-eyed, who kept her phone in a lead box she'd bought online. Derek, pale and jumpy, constantly checking over his shoulder. We sat in room 237, sharing our stories as the sun set. Each tale was more disturbing than the last. Luis described working on a car when tiny fingers had pressed against his back, the touch so cold it had made him scream. Patricia played us a recording of one of her calls, 30 seconds of whispered words that, when played backwards, clearly said Ocean Avenue knows your name. Derek showed us photos from his security cameras. Shadows shaped like people, but people who couldn't possibly be there. The common thread is the broadcast, Kara said, her laptop open, files scattered across the bed. But here's what I don't understand: the deaths stopped after those first 5, but the hauntings are getting worse. Maybe it needs something else, Patricia said quietly. She'd been the quietest of our group, but now she looked directly at me. David, you were the conduit. You played the tape to hundreds of people. What if it's not done with you yet? That night, I woke to the sound of my own voice coming from the bathroom. I crept to the door and peered inside. The mirror showed my reflection, but my reflection was speaking into a microphone that wasn't there, airing a show. I wasn't broadcasting. Behind my reflection, barely visible, stood the silhouette of a child with no face. Tonight's selection comes from a very special place, my reflection was saying. A place where families gather, where love lives, where sometimes, love dies too. I blinked, and the mirror showed only my own terrified face. The next morning, Luis didn't come down for breakfast. We found him in his room, catatonic, staring at a corner where the wallpaper showed the clear impression of a small hand. He whispered, only one thing over and over: she wants to come home. That's when Patricia made the connection. She'd been a nurse for 30 years, had dealt with trauma patients, families in crisis. The voice on the tape, she said, the woman pleading for help. What if she wasn't a victim? What if she was a mother, trying to protect her child from something worse? Kara's fingers flew across her keyboard. The Amityville murders. 6 family members killed. But there were reports of unexplained deaths in the months after. People who'd been in contact with the house. Investigators, reporters. ... The tape isn't cursed. Derek said suddenly, his security guard instincts kicking in. It's a recording of something trying to escape. We spent the day researching, calling contacts, digging through newspaper archives. The pattern emerged slowly. Every few decades, something escaped from 112 Ocean Avenue. Not a demon, not a ghost, but something else, a fragment of the terrible events that had happened there, carrying with it the desperate love of a mother, trying to save her child. But the child was already dead, had been dead for 50 years. And the mother's love had twisted into something hungry, something that needed new families to love, new homes to inhabit. The broadcasts, I realized. Radio waves, electronic signals. It can travel through them, find new places to nest. That evening, as we prepared to leave Memphis and return to our respective homes, I made a decision. I'm going back on the air, I told them. One more broadcast. David. No, Kara pleaded. It's already in my equipment, spreading through my station. But maybe if I give it what it really wants, it'll stop hunting the rest of you. They tried to talk me out of it, but I was already gone, driving through the night back to Florida, back to WKFL. I arrived as the sun was setting, the station, empty except for the overnight DJ, who looked relieved to see me. Grant. Thank God, the equipment's been going crazy. Tapes playing by themselves, phones ringing with no one on the line. I sent him home and locked the door behind him. At midnight. I went on the air for the last time. This is David Grant, and this is Midnight Terrors. Tonight, we have a very special guest, someone who's been trying to reach you, trying to find a way home. I could feel the temperature dropping in the booth. She's been lost for a long time, carrying her child, looking for a family that will understand. The static began, soft at first, then growing stronger. I know you're listening. I said into the microphone, I know what you want. But these people, my listeners, they have their own families. their own children to protect. The woman's voice came through clearly now, no longer pleading but angry. They took my baby. They took my home, I know, but that was 50 years ago. Your baby is at peace now. You can rest 2.0. The word was sharp as broken glass. I need a home. I need a family. I thought of Kara, studying late in her dorm room. Luis in his garage, trying to make an honest living. Patricia, living quietly in retirement. Derek, watching over others through his cameras. Good people who deserve to live their lives without fear. Then take mine, I said. The silence stretched. For an eternity. Then, gently, like a mother tucking in a child. Yes, the cold wrapped around me like a yellow blanket, and I felt small arms embrace me as the broadcast ended. They found my body the next morning, sitting peacefully at my microphone, a smile on my face. The official report said heart failure, natural causes. But Kara, Luis, Patricia, and Derek knew better. They stayed in touch, forming an unlikely family bound by shared terror and survival. Sometimes, late at night, they still hear my voice on the radio, not broadcasting terror, but something else. Lullabies, perhaps. The sound of a man who found peace by giving a lost mother and child the home they'd been seeking for half a century. The haunting stopped. The tapes disappeared. And somewhere, in the space between frequencies, a family finally found rest. But sometimes, if you listen carefully to the static between stations, you might hear a child's laughter, content at last.